Lion as genetic, dragon as mimetic. Richard, the
reference I made to Harry Potter, the reference I made to the Lord of the...
Richard, this concept of the dragon as the abstracted predator as a whole, can we talk meaningfully about the truth in these stories where instead of talking about a predator or this predator or that predator, we're talking about the concept of predators as a whole?
The dragon's a meme.
Yes.
The dragon's a meme.
Yeah.
It's a deep meme.
Well, it doesn't get me, doesn't impress me. I mean, I like reality,
What? You came up with memes? Memes aren't real by your definition, dude. Did anybody notice this whole time? I knew this from the beginning. I'm like, okay, so you're saying ideas are viruses that infect things, but you're a materialist. Do you not see the contradiction, Dawkins? It doesn't impress him that it's a meme. And meme is, quote, his idea, which it most certainly is not, but whatever. But it doesn't impress him. So his own idea doesn't impress him. So maybe it shouldn't impress you because the meme is such a stupid idea. It's hard to imagine, but that's a different video. If you want to see that video, comment. Maybe I'll do it. Although I do have a video on memes, but I could go deeper for sure. Like, really? This is just rebellion. Like, oh, that idea upends everything I've ever thought in my life and proves me wrong about everything. And so I'm just going to say I'm not impressed by it. Yeah, that's what's going on there psychologically, almost for sure. Nobody talks like this in the real world. This guy's not for real. Come on, look at his clown tie. This is crazy talk.
It obviously impresses Jordan, and that's fine. It just, we have a different kind of mind, I think.
Well, I had a comment about that too, because I actually think that's true. So there's a psychological trait, openness, and openness fractionates into two types. One type of mind is associated with deep interest in ideas. People like that tend to prefer nonfiction. A variant of that is openness proper, and it's associated with a much deeper orientation towards the fictional and metaphorical. I do think we have different kinds of minds, but if we accept the presumption that there is a unity of knowledge, and I don't know if that's a presumption that you entertain or presume or share, because we could discuss the alternative, my sense is that those two pathways have to unify. Now, I don't think we know how to unify them in the West. That's why there is this conflict between the scientific and the religious. It's not like I know how to rectify that. The best I can say is this is what I've learned from studying those stories. But I would also say, because I've studied your work,
Okay, before we continue, we talk about just validation after validation. I'm feeling really good about the knowledge engine model right now. You can fix this. It takes about 10 seconds. You just have to understand something. The hard work of doing it, for a person or with a person, right? Of participating in actually doing that instead of yapping about it, come up with theories and writing white papers. That's a different matter, right? Because it requires things like discipline, right? And not, part of the problem is discipline's another tricky word, right? It requires a discipline to be uncomfortable with other people, right? That's what it requires. And that is not a skill that video gamers, for example, have. All right. They think they have it until they don't, and then it just all kind of falls apart. That's one, sort of very important aspect to it. Another sort of very important aspect to it is the poetic way of informing the world fixes that. Like, science can't unify with religion, but religion unifies with science just fine. That's why science is born of religion, right? So it's a splitting, though, right, from the science perspective. That's why science says there's a battle, and religion's like, what are you talking about? It's very much an asymmetrical. The materialists don't like asymmetry for some reason, even though it's kind of built into materialism because there's more matter than antimatter in the universe. Like, I don't understand why when I make statements like that, people can't go, oh, yes, you need a eureka moment from something like that. And if you don't have it, maybe you should do something else. I think, like, maybe you should do something else. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know to have a bunch of insights, and I mean like 100, then maybe this isn't for you. It's like, it's an asymmetrical relationship. The religious people are not fighting the science people, even though, as I mentioned before, I kind of wish we would, so we could just get this fight over with and move on. Because the science people won't win anyway. So let's just get this over with. Let's move on. I'm tired of this. I'm an accelerationist on this one issue. This is so ridiculous. Like, this isn't even hard. Like, yeah, the way you unify is basically by going to church. That's what it is. Like, I don't even, like, the religious people will tell you this. You can just ask them. They'll be like, yeah. It's like, I don't. And you're like, no, I won't. I'm a materialist. It's like so silly. It's really silly. Like, what are you doing? Participation with others, especially people you don't like, is the key. And Jonathan Peugeot said this on a Q&A on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A session, which is on YouTube. So there's a YouTube channel called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. And on there, there's a Q&A. There's only one from Jonathan Peugeot. The audio is pretty bad. The Navigating Patterns Wisdom Shorts channel, which I guess I'll link here, will soon have a clip of this audio. But basically, to summarize what Jonathan Peugeot was saying is, he says, I don't like practices. He's referring to John Vervaeke's practices work. He said, because the thing you get out of church is you are going someplace that, you know, sometimes you don't want to go, right? To be doing something that maybe that moment, you know, you're not feeling well, or you've had a rough week and it's Sunday and you really don't want to do those things at the moment, right? Around people you don't necessarily want to be around ever. Like in church, you bump into all kinds of people, and yeah, a fair bit of them you're not going to like. It's like just like work or family reunions for some people, right? Like, yes. So maybe church is where you learn to do things you don't want to do because they're good for you or good for your soul or your spirit or something, right? With people you don't want to be around, but you all get along anyway. Maybe there's a higher purpose or something. Maybe that would make it all worthwhile. So we just resolved Nietzsche too. Like, that wasn't hard. Was that hard? It didn't seem hard, right? And so I think Jonathan Peugeot might be onto something there. And I mean, he compresses it down to go to church, which I have my issues with. But I mean, he's not wrong, but also some people need a lot more steps. Peterson doesn't even understand this poetic way of informing the world, how symbols unite both horizontally and vertically, right? From the bottom, which is deeper than you can possibly imagine, to the top, which is higher than you can possibly imagine, but towards a unity. So it's taking the multiplicity at the bottom and unifying it at the top through the symbol. That's what the symbol does, technically speaking. And he doesn't understand this. And so the skill that you're missing to unify those two, quote, aspects of openness, I'd heard that one before, is the poetic way of informing the world, because poetic information is the thing that ties things together without being linear and discrete and procedural, right? And you can jump, you know, I already linked the model video earlier. You can jump into the model video and see how it works, right? And then you get 2 types of knowledge, and you've got 4 ways of informing the world. 2 are, we'll say, action-oriented, and 2 are navigation-oriented, right? Because if you're going to take an action in the world, you need to navigate and orient yourself. And that's an easier way to think about all this. And it explains a bunch of stuff. So, and all that work is informed by the wonderful Dr. John Vervaeke. So that's how we, came up with this. This is an extension of what he was talking about, and a recapitulation of many of those concepts. Super important work. So Peterson doesn't have that tool, even though the answer's staring him in the face at some point. It's very strange. And that skill, because science is splitting, science caused that problem. Now, it doesn't have to continue in that problem. Like I said, in the 1930s, 80% of scientists identified as, church-going Christians, roughly speaking, at least in the US, which was the same ratio as the general population. Weird. And now that's not true. Weird. I wonder if that could have anything to do with it. The mysteries will never cease.
I do believe that idea that you formulated of meme is exactly the same thing that Mircea Eliade is detailing out in his work. And I think the reason that he's not attended to by the universities, because he's passé in the history of religious ideas, is because everything he says demolishes the postmodern Marxists. Demolishes them, which is something that seriously needs to be done. And so I keep hoping, I think, God, it would be such a remarkable thing for Dr. Dawkins to know, especially Eliade's work, although Eric Neumann would be a close second, because it takes the notion of meme, which is what was the recreation of the world in imaginal space and the transmission of those recreations and their potential battles. That's what you specified. And it expands it out into something that extends across millennia. It's the logical extension of your idea. And it's not like people know this, because there aren't people who know both literatures.
So I just noticed something I wanted to share. Dawkins describes memes as a mind virus. And then if you take what Peterson said seriously, and you should, I'm not familiar with von Neumann or Eliade, whatever his name is. And too long, not ever going to read, burn all the books. Don't need it. I don't know why you need to read this to know this, but whatever. I guess maybe some people do. I don't know. The way Dawkins talks about memes is very negative, because it's a mind virus. And that's sort of the thing that, is religion and drives us all crazy, is the things in our mind. Now, in a way, he's absolutely right, which is so funny. But also, it's not optional, which he doesn't mention. And there's a lot of good that can come out of it when you use your imagination to find ways to cooperate with other people rather than oppose them, which is why the postmodern project needs to be utterly destroyed. That is true. That is true. It's strange to me that all the concepts Peterson needs to put these things together are like sitting right there, and he doesn't seem to be able to put them together and say, wait a minute, hold on, right? He's also, a lot of people aren't noticing memes are negative to Dawkins. They're mind viruses. He calls them a virus. Like, what? But they're part of the imaginal space. And the so-called modern or recent usage of meme, where it's a picture and some words or whatever. Yeah, you're degrading language to give a worse communication of a set of complex ideas instead of having a long-form conversation. That's what most memes are actually all about. They're also quite entertaining. The two memes I have are quite entertaining. Thank you very much. But they require so much. They're pure context. And unfortunately, our contexts don't match, even if we live like down the street from one another and stuff, because everybody's seeing so many different aspects to the world. And there's so many aspects they can't see that we're all seeing different sets of the world. And we're compressing different other things, right? If you compress human behavior down to economics, right? Oh, money is what drives people. It most certainly does not, by the way. Because you've never read Freakonomics, which sort of puts a bullet in that thesis pretty quickly, then you kind of don't understand how human behavior operates. And then you confuse human behavior and money. And I can't talk to you about the world anymore, because I could just all I do is give those people examples of how they can't be correct, because things didn't play out that way in the world ever. And they just get more and more confused, or they find one thing they think is an exception, and they don't account for all the other factors going on that had nothing to do with the money that might have influenced the situation. And so it's not the money that's driving people at all. And they just get more and more confused because they've made this compression of the world and they just don't understand it. And that's why memes are dangerous, right? Because basically people are flinging things out of their imagination, right, from their fantasy world into the real world and expecting people to cohere to their fantasy world. And that looks like a culture war, among other things. But that's one of the things it looks like.
So this idea of lion as gene, dragon as meme, I think in so many words that it sounds like that's sort of a summary of what you're getting at. And I get the impression, Richard, that you might agree with the idea that the dragon is an effective mimetic abstraction of the concept of individual predators, but it's just not that impressive.
Yes.
It's just not that,
Well,
that it's true, but it's not an impressive truth.
Be impressive at the same time that you are compelled and interested by the idea of meme. I mean, let me ask you a psychological question, if you don't.
Okay. That was the correct thing to say for sure. Like, you can't hold the two positions at once, dude. That's a performative contradiction, right? You're performing unimpressed while stating that this idea was important to you. I pointed this out earlier. I'm glad Peterson called him out for it. I mean, I would have nailed him to the wall about it. I would have said, are you saying your idea is banal and uninteresting? And let him deal with the fallout of his statement. Like, no, bro, you said this. Your entire popularity is based on this one idea. And now you're saying no one should be impressed by it because you're not impressed by it? Or are you not impressed by the fact that other people had a richer, more full conception of what you're talking about and wrote about it prior to you? What is it exactly that you're not impressed by? I would love to know.
Don't mind. You're obviously welcome not to answer it, but there's a reason that the idea of meme gripped you, and there's a reason it spread. It's because you put your finger on something. So can I ask you how that idea emerged and why it attracted you?
As a Darwinian, I'm interested in the process of natural selection. Natural selection is the differential survival of replicating entities. DNA is a very excellent replicating entity, whose replication and selection has given rise to the whole of life on Earth. I wanted to make the point that DNA is not the only possible replicator you could imagine.
Right?
There might be on other, and there probably is on other planets, a different kind of replicator, not DNA. And then I thought, maybe we don't have to go to other planets. Maybe there's another replicator staring us in the face, the virus of the mind, something that spreads not by DNA replication, but by imitation from mind to mind. So it could be a fashion in clothes, it could be a musical style, it could be an accent, a speech accent, it could be a children's game that spreads through school. All these things are replicators which spread by a non-genetic means and might therefore potentially be the basis for a form of Darwinian selection.
Yep.
Darwinian selection would be popularity, the spreadability of an idea.
The longevity of an idea?
Yes, longevity of an idea, the spreadability, the fidelity of it, of the idea.
How about the grip of motivation by the idea?
Wow, this is fascinating. I love this. So I want you to notice that Dawkins called DNA an entity. I'd like to explain something. It's not an entity. There's no definition where that makes any sense, right? It's a component of an entity. It's a required component of an entity for an entity to replicate. There are other things required, and that's why it's not an entity, or part of the reason why it's not an entity. There's a bunch of other stuff, some of which we actually don't know, and Dawkins should be fully well aware that we don't know that. We have no idea, right? Epigenetics is really new. really new. I'm almost certain epigenetics hadn't even been coined when he wrote his first book. So there's a bunch of stuff going on they don't know anything about. And messenger RNA is really important, by the way. No one knows how it works. Just saying, still, right? Because it's a messaging system. So its level of complexity is unknown to us, even to this day. And so that's important to know. Don't let anybody pull out the science on mRNA. There isn't any to speak of. Oops. The top guy in the field actually has said this publicly. So there are 3 components, minimum, that we know about today at this moment. Right. 3. And so the gene cannot replicate without the epigenome and the messenger RNA. It's not possible. So there's a problem there. And there's more components required than just that, right? Like, so there's a lot going on here. And it's the lot going on here part that they're not even trying to explain. And that's why they fall into using words like entity to describe something like a gene. And I'm really puzzled by why anybody... let me see if I can... who grew up with an IQ over 80 doesn't already understand that things spread in the fashion that Dawkins outlined. Look, I'm sorry, but also, what is going on? To really, like, fashion just occurred to you, sir? What? How do you think you know anything at all? Knowledge comes from mimicry. You know where else it comes from? There is no other place it comes from. Sorry, it really doesn't. Isn't that to say you don't modify that mimicry and improve upon it? But it comes from mimicry. Everything starts there and moves from there. It's not that hard. And it's a sequence, and something comes first. This is why they're confused, because they don't want to believe something comes first. That's creation denial. So, yeah, there's plenty of other ways of replication, right? The way cells divide has nothing to do with DNA. Oops. It has nothing to do with it. It's like, I don't know what to tell you, dude. He's a biologist, huh? Really? Really? Is it just pick and choose which biology he wants to believe? I don't understand he's a Protestant biologist, apparently. I don't know what to say. He didn't like parthenogenesis, and now he doesn't understand cell replication. Like, I don't, and that's not the only way, right? So, yeah, I mean, a lot of things are handed down culturally that we'll say don't meet the recent definition of meme, right? Because again, most of the things you learn are through mimicry. You watch your parents. And then you go, oh, I should do that too. Yes, you should do the thing of the people around you so you don't create a tribe of one and get wiped out. Sure, that's a stupid way to say it, but it's not wrong. It's just a little stupid, but also true. Like, okay, sure. That's why and you see that across animal species, right? There's the whole, like, the baby duck will follow the first thing it sees, sure, right? Yes, like these, I mean, it's not 100%, by the way, either. Just saying, there's more going on, right? But also, like, these are real factors in the world. They were kind of known about long before Dawkins came on the scene. So I mean, as was born. So this is old, like very old stuff. It's written about by so-called philosophers. It's written about all over the place. Like, I don't understand why this is. I mean, I guess you can coin a term for some aspect of it, but like I said, there's lots of ways that this happens.
Like, would you expect?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a possibility, and I would even concede that an archetype might be one way in which certain memes might spread more than others. It might be compatible with a Jungian archetype. So that's my answer to the question. It was coming at it as a Darwinian and wanting to make the point that DNA probably, having spent the rest of the book stressing the gene as the unit of selection, I want to make the point that it may not be the only one.
Okay. So
All right, so I'm going to go out on a limb. I haven't read all of The Origin of Species. Note the title. I am willing to bet significant sums of money that I don't have that Darwin wrote about this already. And I say that for a couple reasons. One is, he's collating a bunch of work from a bunch of other people, right? So I bet this is in there, the fact that there's other ways of spread. Also, let's go back to the title, shall we? It's The Origin of Species. Okay. Species is referring to an ontology that relates to the physical representations and manifestations of organisms that are alive. Right? That's what species refers to. It's not trying to explain how what do I want to say? Darwin is not trying to explain philosophical concepts like how and why people copy other people. Like he's not even talking about humans. Right? It's not the point of the book. The point of the book is to justify, and it is a justification, why species can be categorized and the process of doing that. In other words, he's laying out a science, a type or set of ontologies. So why we would expand this past that small bucket, because we're in a very small bucket now, we're in an ontology of life bucket. It doesn't include rocks and right? It doesn't include the shape of the earth. It doesn't include things like gravity. Like it excludes most of nature, right? So that's one way to look at it. So evolutionary theory or Darwinism or whatever excludes necessarily most things because it's talking about the origin of species, which is an ontology that relates specifically to the categorization of physical forms of life. That's it. That's all it is. It doesn't purport to explain anything else. So it's justifying the science of living organisms and how they grow and change over time. That's it. That's all it's doing. It's not meant to describe the world. It's not meant to describe human behavior. It's not meant as an add-on to the burgeoning field of psychology. Like it's not meant for that. And if you're using it for that, you're already out of your lane. And this is what people miss when people are out of their lane. Right? You can't apply economics to life in prison and expect to get good results. It's not that there aren't correlations and corollaries, but that's not the same thing. And this is where we think everything's the same thing, and so everything can be applied to everything else, and that's not true. And a lot of this is just misapplication of a good tool. In other words, you're using a hammer and you don't have a nail. Right. And then maybe you shouldn't do that. Right. And then maybe these, quote, problems don't happen. Right. That's the bigger point. It turns out if you don't have a nail, you shouldn't use a hammer. And if you don't try to use a hammer, all of these problems never happen. And you don't have to have these silly discussions where people make these are silly statements. And that's the problem. Oh, I've misapplied Darwin's work completely, totally, and utterly because I misunderstood the title of his book, apparently. And now I've come up with an idea that was obvious to everybody since the dawn of time and explains fashion. And I put a new word on it and then called it a mind virus. Now, why would you what's the motivation for calling it a virus of the mind? Are you saying your imagination is a virus? I don't understand. Like, let's take one step further and look at the implications of just saying there is a mind virus. So you've materialized thought, because a virus is material, like it has a structure and stuff, and it replicates. Well, that's interesting. A virus is the very sort of replication device that Dawkins was claiming, like, it just occurred to me. Really, dude? How about bacteria? Anyway, see what I mean? Like this, okay, he studied biology, did he? Are you sure? I don't know. I get questions. I get questions. That's all. I get questions. You've made it material and tried to science it. Right? And viri are typically seen as negative. But it's in your mind, wherever that is. So now there's a material thing in a mind, which is, I don't think it's material. Maybe he'd put it in the brain, or the combination of the brain and the electrical signals he would call thoughts or something. I don't know. How do you square this circle? There's lots of ways to try to square the circle. They just don't work, but whatever. Like, I'd love to hear. I really do revel in listening to people struggle to explain things that aren't and can't be. It's a fault. It's definitely a fault of mine. It's also born of a genuine fascination. How does this person's mind work exactly? Where are their limits and boundaries, or will they just glom any two words together and call it a day? I don't know. I have no idea. So once you sort of think about it, like, why is fashion bad? Right? Because, I mean, are peacocks bad? The male peacocks with their fashionable, like, I don't understand where you're going with this. Fashion, or what we refer to as fashion, seems to be required for mating. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like, because fashion is a form of selection, or a subtype of selection or something. I just don't even know where you go with these ideas. I'm like, these ideas are great, but if you actually push one step further, they break down pretty quickly. And it's like, are you sure it's a good idea? Right? It's like, oh, I'm going to drive as fast as I can into this unknown wilderness. And it's like, well, that's a good idea, unless you drive off a cliff. Are you sure you're not going to drive off a cliff? You got to know the next step. You got to know what's coming.
That's what I understood from your work. So it is on that grounds that I saw the concordance between what you were doing and what Eliade was doing in his investigation into the spread of religious ideas. I like what you described is what I understood. Okay, so let me ask you another question about that. Okay, so could you imagine a scenario where a mean had sufficient functional adaptive significance so that the individuals who acted it out gained a reproductive edge?
Yes.
Okay, so then you could imagine a situation where there was, I think I've got this right, a Baldwin effect between the meme and the genome.
Yes.
Okay, so then could you imagine an effect where the heroic hunters of the past who decided to cease acting like prey animals, maybe when they got rocks or sticks, were acting under the impulse that facing down the predator was the appropriate strategy? Because I was thinking about this reproductively. Like, you know that women are hypergamous. They like men cross-culturally about 4 years older than they are. The most fundamental female pornographic fantasy involves vampires, werewolves, pirates, surgeons, and billionaires. Dominant men who are capable of standing up to predators, who can be brought into an individual relationship. Okay, so that's That's the fundamental reproductive story meme that seems to drive women. It's allied with the hero myth. They're the different variants of the same story, the different sexual variants of the same story. And it seems to me it's not unreasonable to note that that's the fundamental story of humanity. And so I don't understand why you're not impressed by that.
We started talking about the Baldwin effect, and suddenly we got into women, what women like. I mean,
well, the men who act out the heroic meme are much more likely to reproduce.
Okay. Well, this is great. See, I don't know. Some days I feel prophetic, I guess. Yeah, if you step through these things, and I like that Peterson did it. Like, he stepped through it. And yeah, I mean, to Dawkins' point, like, he went one step too far. Like, he should have stopped, right, before he got into the reproductive thing and the women preference thing, right? Because he jumped abstraction layers at that point and made it more concrete. And that's the mistake that materialists don't like. Because if you make it concrete and they're materialist, that kills their worldview. And that's what they're resisting. And like, Farron, you should resist that to some extent. Like, this is not, how dare they, right? It's, oh yeah, of course. But had he kept it abstract, he could have stepped in through it more slowly. Time is a factor. That's why I disagree with Jonathan Bijot saying go to church, because it's like, that's too far too fast. That's all it is. It's too far too fast. I would say the success of Jordan Peterson is in drawing people slowly out and up, step by step. And those, the steps that Peterson makes, if you pay attention to the Maps of Meaning lecture series, are very small, actually. They're kind of embarrassingly tiny at some level. And that, I think, is the success. It's a very long lecture series. Seems like forever, especially on your third listening, which I did listen to one of them 3 times. We were going through it on the Discord server as an exercise, right? As a practice. It's quite good. Highly recommend. But you can see this bringing people step by step is what's needed, because Dawkins clearly never made any of these steps on his own for some weird reason. What did he write about this in the 70s, early 80s, something like that? And it's been all that time, and this has never occurred to him at all? Really? Really? It's like, really? And why are we listening to this guy? If he can't make simple steps like that, like, he's not, it all follows logically from the things he says he believes and how he came about the idea. It looks like he just found a good idea and stopped. I was like, oh, I built my better mousetrap. See you later, bye, or something. I don't know. I don't understand this at all. And then I like, that's fine. Like, people do that, whatever. It's not like a big deal. But like, why are we listening to people that do this? This is an easy error to find at some level. It's like, oh, what are the implications? Oh, you don't know what they are? All right, well, maybe you don't understand your idea well enough for me to adopt it. Problem never appears. Look at that. That was easy. Wasn't that easy? It seemed easy.
Example, but perhaps we need to explain what the Baldwin.
I was going to say that's probably helpful.
Yes, that would be useful.
Okay. It was suggested by Baldwin, I think in the late 19th century. It's a kind of genetic assimilation of a cultural or a learned idea. So the idea is that certain animals learn things, learn a clever trick. It might be nut cracking by chimpanzees, for example, or potato washing by Japanese macaques, or opening milk bottles by English tits. And it perhaps spread as mimetically as an epidemic of copying, and that's known to have happened with the blue tits and great tits in Britain. Now, certain individuals are likely to learn it faster than others, and there may be genetic variation in the speed with which they learn it. And as the generations go by, natural selection would have favored speed of learning the new trick. And eventually they would have learned the new trick so fast they didn't need to learn it at all.
Right.
It becomes genetically assimilated into the genome. That's the Baldwin effect.
Okay, that I would.
Wow. Okay. They learn it so fast that it becomes genetically assimilated. Is there like a mechanism? Like, what are you talking about? Are you sure? That doesn't sound realistic at all to me. You go, what do you mean? You learn it so like, are you sure? Or maybe when you mate creatures that can notice a pattern of that type, the likelihood that their offspring will recognize that type without having to learn it goes up. Maybe that's a better way to explain it. We'll say evolutionarily. I don't like any of this, by the way. But I mean, even in their frame, that's a little sus. I don't know where you're getting that from. You learn it so fast that the speed becomes is that how the world works? Because I don't know anything in the world that works that way, but I mean, maybe there's something. I don't know. It doesn't sound like, I don't know of any. Most the thing that a lot of these people, in particular scientists, miss is scale, right? Where you see linearity in the world, that's because you're at a stable point of scale. And where linearity disappears, that's because you've changed scale layers, roughly speaking, right? And so, I mean, if you watch a Mandelbrot set long enough, maybe you'll see it. I do. I see it all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, look at that. And you can see the point at which it's still the same. And then there's a transition point and it changes. But now it's still the same. It's not the same as it was, but now it stays the same for a while. And then there's a transition point, right? And that over and over again. And that's a change in scale. I was like, oh, right. So they don't seem to understand that. But that doesn't mean that one leads to the other, right? There's lots of other ways. And I think there are actually lots of other ways that this so-called Baldwin effect could happen, right? One of them is, like I said, with the patterns, like maybe you just automatically recognize those patterns. Another one is, it's possible that those patterns get encoded in the genome somehow, or in the genome infrastructure, right? Because it wouldn't be the genes. We already know it's not in the genes, but it could be in the messenger RNA, epigenome, and gene combination. That's now mathematically feasible. So, that's actually super important to understand and realize. I don't know why the faster and then suddenly it's there thing is a thing, but I find that shocking. And it could also be, I mean, it must also be that if you don't use it, you lose it, right? And so over generations, you could lose that pattern. That's more interesting to me, especially given what's going on, right? So, because now you can posit interesting things, like actually interesting things. Now, this is not actually interesting, I would argue. Like, did we lose the patterns that allow us to think the way a medieval person thought? Wow. Now, that would be a cool discussion to have with, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 different people who have, I don't even know off the top of my head what kind of disciplines you'd need to get together for that. But hey, if somebody wants to make that happen, I totally want in on that kind of a discussion. That sounds fascinating. I'd love to have Jonathan Peugeot and maybe one of those, a few medieval scholars of various types, right? And then maybe somebody, a theologian who's deeply steeped in specifically medieval history. Of one of the churches, maybe the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church. That there's an interesting discussion right there. That discussion would, and I want to be in it. But even if I wasn't in it, I'd love to watch a discussion like that, where maybe the Baldwin effect, because you notice again, and I've talked about this before, but you really have to understand. Part of the trick is these people just make positive only statements all the time, except with something they don't like, and then they call it a mind virus. Because church or religion or something, right? And then they go back on that and they say cultural Christianity because, oh my goodness, I've ruined the world. And now my unconscious notices it and my conscious mind still won't let go. I might be describing Dawkins there because, yes. I'm not saying I'm right, but also you should consider that thesis very carefully before assuming I'm wrong about that. And I'm not the only one. I didn't get that on my own, by the way. This is not a like original idea by Mark. Other people have mentioned this. So that idea that things are positive only when they're science or when they're scienceable or when I know them is one of those unconscious manipulations of your mind, enchantments, that gives you the impression that science is good and science is all this wonderful stuff, which I've said before, it absolutely is not. It's a complete lie. I don't know what else to say. It's just that simple at some level. And that we should, try to use science to do, because it's been so successful here, to do all these other things in spheres that have nothing to do with science. And that's part of the trick that they're playing. It's a trick. I mean, they're playing it on themselves. They're not necessarily malicious, although some of them absolutely are, by the way. There are predators within the sciences, like Jeffrey Epstein, for example. Oh, weird. Yeah. So you can see their predators are allowed in that space because they're too busy doing other silly things and being positive about everything. And, there have been dire consequences to having a positive only outlook on the theories around Darwin and evolution and genetics. These have killed millions of people. So maybe we should be a little careful when we're talking about this stuff, because maybe you're not going to get led down the wrong path, or maybe you've already destroyed medicine, or at least damaged it. But maybe somebody else will. Maybe that's why we need forbidden knowledge, and you shouldn't just try to tell everybody everything. All right, because maybe you'll overload them and they'll just come up with bad ideas and use the tools you've created to do things that you didn't intend and shouldn't be done. Maybe, I don't know. Boy, that seems like a really good idea, Mark.
Say that that's essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretical
Well, that's
model.
very interesting, because that suggests that Jungian archetypes might be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect.
Yes,
Now, that's
yes.
a fascinating idea.
Yes. Okay, so now
I know we're coming to the end of our time soon anyway. It's nice to end on a shared point of interest, which is the Baldwin effect and the archetype's potential origin in the Baldwin effect. Do you think that is something that is worth exploring further? Is that something that we can
crucial
that we can
to
test?
I think it's
because
interesting. Yes.
Well, it speaks of the potential relationship between the spread of memes and the alteration of the genetic process. I would say it probably happens fastest by sexual selection. So
Yes.
right. So imagine that.
I gotta stop it here and make a couple of quick notes. Hopefully we are actually getting at the end of this, although we only have 9 minutes left, which could take me another hour to get through, but hopefully not. We'll see. This idea that Alex outlined doesn't make any sense at all. Because basically it's emergence is good argument, right? Oh, these archetypes get incorporated into your genes from memes. No, there's a bunch of problems here, right? And it's, roughly speaking, it's the problem of judgment. Jonathan Peugeot, where are you standing to make the judgment that the archetype should be or will be or gets instantiated in the genes? That can't come from the meme, it can't come from the archetype, and it can't come from the genes. It's got to come from outside of all of that stuff. And that's the materialism. Like, that's the problem with materialism, is it's self-referencing. It doesn't have a way to talk about where this stuff comes from. Why does it replicate? Well, what does replication, what does success mean? Another word for success, these people will throw around fitness a lot, right? That's the same concept. Like, fitness. What do you mean by fitness? Oh, success at doing a task, maybe, or the world not wiping you out. Yeah, but not dying is success. like, I don't, this is what I keep saying. Like, evolution only requires a negative signal. You can simulate, I've done it. I've physically, personally, myself, more than once have done it. It's not hard. You can simulate it on an 8-bit computer when you're 8 years old. Also, I know this because I did it. So this isn't hard, right? You just need a negative signal. That's all you need. You need a negative signal or a random number generator and a few rules. Like you need some rules, right? And all the rules you need are fittedness rules, right? They're success rules. What determines what replicates and what determines what dies, right? Well, it turns out that if you just say what determines what replicates is a random, like a random number, like an actual random number, and you just determine what dies, you're done. But that doesn't determine what's good, what's better, and what's best. In order to get into the archetypes game, to elevate memes to archetypes, you need to talk about good, better, and best. Right. So good, better, and best. Good, better, and best. Are we got the vertical yet? The vertical causality that materialists can't deal with? Because material is all horizontal automatically. Not saying there aren't hierarchies in the horizontal. You can certainly place them there. We call them ontologies. They are arbitrary in that they are dependent on telos, or final cause. Final cause is above or outside, hopefully both. It's always outside. It's not necessarily above. You can have a bad telos. How do you know it's bad? Because it's not above. Do you see it yet? Like, it's not that they're never going to make any progress until they get there. Like, Alex has made a bunch of assumptions about archetypes being good and being incorporated and all that. Like, do they pre-exist? Because the Baldwin effect seems to be based on a pre-existing pattern, the way they described it. I'm not familiar with the work, but the way they described it is it's a pre-existing pattern, and they don't talk about where the pattern starts at. Where does the pattern that they're mimicking come from? But that's the real question. These other questions are boring, actually. Who cares? I know people mimic things. Thanks, genius. Gerard's work, I was like, really? This is impressive? Why is he tying it to sacrifice? Mimicry has nothing to do with sacrifice. Mimicry is everywhere, but it doesn't have anything to do in particular with any of the things. It's kind of separate, right? And this is all easy stuff. Like, yes, people mimic things. Thank you. I've seen a baby. I've been around children. In fact, I was a children. I remember copying things. I don't, including other children. I do it now. The first thing I used to do when I consult is I'd say, do you have a standard format for documentation? And they're like, what? And some of them did. Some were like, well, yeah, it depends on the documentation, but here are our style sheets, basically, our format sheets. And I was like, okay, good. You know, and a few stupid people would ask me, why do you need that? And I'm like, because I want to write something you can understand in a format you're familiar with. Duh. Because I want to mimic what you do so that it's familiar to you, even though I'll be telling you things in that format or frame. Oh, it's right there, right? It will be more familiar to you because of the frame, but the things I'm telling you will be new or different. They won't necessarily be new, but maybe their construction or their sequence or their procedure will be new. Oh, right. And then if they don't have one, which, you know, many companies don't actually, I would gin one up based on the data, right? I'd look at the data. I'd usually, such a long process. I mean, it didn't take me a lot of time because I'm quick. It's a long process because I have to write the document out in I have a generic format that I use. I write the document out and we'll just call it Mark standard format or something, right? MSF. And then I would work it from there. Right. And then I would rework it and restructure it. And sometimes I'd have to not rewrite it, but like copy paste everything on the page and move it, or everything on all the pages, almost always a multi-page document, and move it all around until I got something where I felt like there was a match. And sometimes I screwed it up. I'm not perfect. Welcome to the world. You're not perfect either. So it's all good. I haven't met any perfect people. If you met perfect people, comment below and let me know. I'd love to meet them. But I'd try to get a flavor for what the audience could hear, because some audiences can't hear certain things, right? You walk into a Microsoft shop and you say, hey, you could run your whole business for 1/10 the cost by switching to Linux. And it's not going to work. They're going to kick you out and not pay the bill, right? So there's a way in which it matters, right? Dawkins could not hear Peterson's point at all. He couldn't hear it. Right. And I'm not saying that just presenting it differently or presenting again, anyway, will fix the problem, because it may not. There's certainly the immovable object problem. There's also a problem of comprehension. There's a lot of people that can't comprehend things that you would think they should be able to comprehend, but that actually happens all the time. And you need to know that, so that you don't get wrapped up looking for a more perfect world than we have, because that's not the world we have, right? And then once you sort of understand, it's like, oh, okay. But there is an audience. We can get a flavor for the sorts of things that they care about. And then we can format things that go with the message, right? They're reciprocal in that way. They affect each other, right? If you want to go medium is the message. And that helps them to understand and increases the chances that you'll be heard. That's true. And it's good to know. And this step-by-step process that Peterson's been going through has been helping Dawkins with that. The problem is it doesn't answer where all that comes from. Where do archetypes come from? Is that a pre-existing pattern that they're conforming to? Because the Baldwin effect says it is. Oh, interesting. There's an interesting question.
Imagine that a meme, okay, so imagine a meme develops, a representation, imaginal, and the people who embody it are more effective in dealing with predators. And then imagine that there's a concordance between that and the attractiveness of those males to women. Seems highly probable. Well, then you can see that because sexual selection is a pretty rapid mechanism, that Baldwin effect gets spinning
I totally agree with that.
rapidly.
I've even suggested, actually, a slightly way out suggestion, that the human habit of standing on our hind legs might have been sexually selected and then genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect. Chimpanzees do sometimes walk on their hind legs. Now, if for mimetic reasons that was sexually attractive in our ancestors, so that it spread
issue?
as an epidemic of sexual display, then natural selection could have favored those individuals who were best at standing on their hind legs, genetically speaking, and then it would become genetically assimilated. This sexually selected mimetic effect could have been genetically assimilated and given rise to the genetic tendency to walk on our hind legs.
So I remember what I was going to ask you about this. So imagine you have a situation in the biblical narratives where the idea of sacrifice is dramatized and ritualized. So it's acted out. It's not exactly understood. It's dramatized and acted out. Well, I believe there's a concordance between the probability that that sacrifice would be offered and the ability of someone to forego gratification or to work towards a future end. They're the same thing. And the ability to forego gratification, which is associated with cortical development, is a great predictor of future success. Let's say future, because we know, for example, that trait conscientiousness, which is something like the ability to delay gratification, is the best predictor that isn't cognitive of long-term future success. The ability to sacrifice the present for the future is a hallmark of a strategy of adaptation that's going to propagate down the generations.
That's interesting.
So I want you to note something about how Peterson's talking about these things. He's very much trapped in the materialism. And I think that when you start thinking about, because there's a great debate actually in the evolutionary biology in particular about the different mechanisms of change in Darwinian evolution, because there's not one, there's many. There were already many. So again, I don't know why Dawkins is surprised to discover memetics. When you think about whether or not the local change exapts out or up into the future, in other words, the whole giraffe stretched his neck a little bit more each time to eat higher and higher leaves as the other giraffes of lower height ate the leaves thing, I'm pretty sure that's actually been completely dispelled through experimentation. And other mechanisms actually work in the long term, and that short-term adaptation mechanism does not typically work the way they outlined. Now, that's a contentious issue from the last time I checked, which granted was probably 10 years ago, in the field. But also, these things are not as solid as you might think. It's nice, comforting inference, right? It gives us a nice, rational, logical story that we can bite into in our minds and understand, but that's not necessarily true. And I think the other thing we're missing here is preference isn't the only factor. And I don't know why they do this, but this is a positive only way of thinking about it. Okay. If the guys who can stand on hind legs scare away more predators because they're taller, because that's actually how that works, oddly enough. You can just look in the animal kingdom, right? Some things are yellow or red, or lizards will puff up their throats to scare off birds, and it works. It's like, okay. The lack of success means they're dead. That's what that means. And what death means is that they're not available to be preferred. So preference doesn't factor into that at all, because the preference isn't available. So you can see, like, the idea that they're available and they just get chosen or not chosen is a very positive, rosy outlook on how the world actually functions. If you're dead, no one prefers you because you aren't available in the preference pool. That's a very different statement, and it's a very different problem to solve at some level. And it's a huge factor. And they don't talk about that, which is, to me, that's a little weird, man. Like, why wouldn't you talk about the constraints? Why wouldn't you talk about the limitations? And what did I say about the scientific project earlier? It's working outside its constraints and limitations and bounds. It's trying to do things it can't do. Or at least the scientists in it are trying to do things they can't do using tools that are inappropriate. So this theme is everywhere. And look, you may think this is a minor issue, right? But it's actually a major issue. Because effectively what you're telling people, and unconsciously they will understand this, whether they can understand it rationally and communicate it or not, again, something psychologists know well and should talk about more, they will feel like if they don't have a woman, it's because the women don't choose them. And then they will do strange things, like either they'll become misogynistic and say, those women won't choose me because they're mean or bad people or whatever, or they'll start going out like, I'm just going to go to the gym until women choose me, or whatever. I'm gonna make $1 million so that they'll choose me, right? Or I'm going to dress up as a vampire because that's part of women preference. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe telling people that is how we got here. It's not the only way, but I don't think it's a positive contribution to tell people that and leave out the negative case and leave out all the other factors, by the way. Because then you just leave everybody confused as to how the world works. Why don't we just say, we don't know how any of this stuff works, and we don't need to? Because if we just act in the world, this will resolve itself. Because it will.
Interesting. As a Canadian, you probably know about the potlatch phenomenon.
Yes.
Where a great sacrifice is a social display, destruction of one's own property which is a form of sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Destruction of one's own property is a mark of prestige.
Right. Well, it indicates in all those communities, it indicates two things: your willingness to distribute generously to the community because you're a big man if you can do that, but also your faith in the process by which that wealth was generated. I'm so good at.
Oh, what about the fact that you did it? That you can generate excess to the point where you can waste it? Why else do you think anybody ever bought a Mercedes? Ever? A Mercedes is a pointless car except as a signal to others. Right. Especially once Lexus comes along. Why would you buy a Mercedes instead of a Lexus? Like, what drugs are you on? You're not on any drugs. You're signaling something. And that's why you need signal theory to understand any human behavior at all. And it also explains memetics. What are you mimicking? You're mimicking a signal. Are you mimicking the thing in and of itself? No, because you can't. You can only mimic not only what part of the signal you get, but how well you interpret what's going on. Wait a minute, that opens up a world of possibilities. Right. Once you see that, and you got to really see it, but once you see it, that changes everything in the world for you. And you're like, oh my goodness, these people are mimicking this person poorly. And these people are mimicking this person poorly. And these people are poorly. Right? And then they come up with their little pet theories. Well, here's how the world works. Blah, 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 blah. And you're like, yeah, but lots of people are doing that and not having that result. So that can't be how the world works. Wasn't that easy? It's easy to disprove these things because you know people are doing that and they're not having the end result. So that then the world doesn't work that way. Right? Those may be factors or they may not. Right? Right now, I guess they're trying to take InfoWars away from Alex Jones. And Tim Pool is like, he's just going to build another thing. Like, what are you doing? This isn't going to work. He's just going to build another empire. And that's the point Peterson's about to make. But the fact that he had the empire in the first place. And so what are they doing? They're mimicking the social justice mobs. They're mimicking the strategy of, if we make them materially unsuccessful, because we're materialists and material is everything, then he's done and no longer significant in society. Well, that would be true if material worked that way, but it just turns out that you can rebuild things. And if you have the skills, or the competence is what we normally refer to it as, then you can just do it again. So why are they taking it away from him? Spite? Jealousy? Anger? Demonic possession? Pure evil? I don't know. Take your pick. Doesn't really matter to me. I am a pragmatist. They are the bad guys. That wasn't hard. Was that hard? That didn't seem hard.
See, I think women use wealth as a marker of sexual attractiveness, not because they're interested in wealth, but because wealth is the best single predictor of the ability to generate wealth. And the potlatch is that kind of manifestation. It's like, yes, I have all this stuff. I can give it away and burn it, and I can make it again. Because it isn't the wealth, it's the capacity to generate the wealth, right? It's a process or a spirit, you could say, if you wanted to get metaphorical about it. So there's this remarkable concordance between your work and these works that I've been investigating. Like I said, no one knows the two literatures. And so it's very frustrating in a sense, because I understood your concept of meme, I would say, in exactly the way that you just laid it out. And I thought, this is exactly what I've been studying. There's these fundamental narratives, and the people who embody them. Look, the heroes in the theater, they're actors of a narrative meme. They're obviously attractive. People flock to watch them. You know that if you take vervets and you show them pictures of the other vervets in their troops, they spontaneously gaze longer at the higher status vervets. Right, it's exact. So imagine this, in the human society is that you have people who act out the appropriate meme, let's say, which is something like a meta strategy for dealing with predation. It's something like that. You can approximate that to a greater or lesser degree. The more you approximate that, the higher you are on the sexual selection, in the sexual selection hierarchy. And I think that's clear. Like, it's a bit more complicated than that, because women seem to be, the pornographic literature that women prefer is both the capacity to stand up against predation and maybe even to be a predator, but that has to be brought into alliance with the ability to make a intimate relationship and share. So
I just want to point something out. So another theme that you should notice at some point, hopefully, is trying to understand the greater thing from the lesser thing. This is more emergence is good. They're trying to grasp how humans behave by how monkeys behave, or rodents or birds, or whatever flavor of the week they're doing. I really don't care, right? And at the same time, they hold we're not mere animals, right? And so they're recognizing at some level, when it's convenient to science or their conception of science, that there's way more to us, and that comparison is unfair because we're way more better than the animals or something. And fair enough. I mean, yes. Seems like an easier way to say that, or a quicker, better way to say that. Maybe somebody wrote that down earlier, a few thousand years ago. I don't know. And at the same time, they're like, oh, no, we can understand human behavior by looking at these things. And this thing about no one's read the two literatures. I haven't read any of that literature and I already knew all these things. Maybe you don't need the literature. Maybe you just look around, pay attention. I don't know. It's a thought, maybe. I don't know. It could be. So this is agenosis, right? People prefer the information, right? The knowledge over the observation and the participation. Just do the thing. And like the smartest people I know all work with their hands. And a lot of them are better read than I am. I'm like, how do you have time to read? You have audiobooks. I'm like, So this way of thinking is just terrible. It's terrible. Why are we going down that road in that way? It doesn't really make any sense to me why anybody would even want to compare humans to lesser creatures. I mean, other than to make a point about you being wrong about how animals behave. And we are also animals, right? Like that's the platform upon which we are built in evolutionary biology. That's a silly way to think about the world, by the way, but that's how they think about the world, clearly. I mean, this is how they talk. So it's also important because once you notice this pattern of speech, you can tell exactly where they stand, exactly what their arguments are going to be, and exactly whether or not you should talk to them or go to the beach or the mountains or have a meal instead. I know, let's not talk about any of this stuff. Let's go to my favorite Chinese food restaurant or something. I don't know. And eat in silence and appreciate each other's company. Did you know you can appreciate people's company without speaking? I can. I hope you can. It's a skill you can learn. I promise. You can appreciate somebody's company even at McDonald's. I should put that quote somewhere. That did you know? I could do alternative Marcus Aurelius quotes. maybe I'll do that. That sounds like an unbelievable amount of work, but maybe I'll consider doing that. I've got meditations on the bookshelf somewhere.
it's like half monster, half cooperative distributor, cooperative generous distributor. It's something like that. You can see that's a real knife's edge evolutionarily, because you want someone who can keep the real monsters at bay. But if they're such a monster that they don't share and aren't generous and can't take care of their children, they're just another bloody predator.
So, Richard, the Baldwin effect applied not so much just to the mimetic preference for people who stand up, for example, but something like a dragon, the abstracted predator, is there any kind of Baldwin effect implication of this kind of
I
meme?
think there could be. I mean, I think it's an interesting idea that Jungian archetypes could be Baldwinized memes.
And perhaps the dragon could be one of those
Well, Jung
somehow.
didn't have that terminology,
No,
even the Baldwin effect
No
terminology, but that notion is implicit in his writings. Like he was struggling. He also didn't precisely understand sexual selection, let's say. So the idea lurks implicitly in his work. There's never a statement like that, but you can see clear indications of his struggling towards something like a Baldwin effect explanation.
Now, chaps, I'm afraid that we are just about out of time, but we will be having a secondary conversation on Daily Wire Plus.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Here's what I want to point out. One thing I think is very, very clear is that Peterson starts talking about, you want to be a monster. And this, I think, is a real weakness in his work, actually. And it shows here. You want to be a monster, but you want to be a monster that cooperates. Okay. So what you have are conflicting definitions, like right there. No, I'm sorry. You want to be a predator, but a predator that cooperates. Otherwise, you're a pure predator. Like the fact that you have to backtrack on these things means you're using the wrong terminology. Right. And the reason why you're using the wrong terminology is not because you don't have the dictionary definitions that would help you. It's because you don't have the conceptions that would help you. Right. Not in all cases. Sometimes people are just missing words, but you can tell because they're usually less confident when they speak. Peterson's really confident that monsters is the right word. It's the wrong word. And again, this goes back to, I think I said it earlier in this series, but I've said it elsewhere. This idea of the hero is nonsense. It's not what's in the mythology. Right? But what is in the mythology, like these guys talk about these books as though they've read them. And I'm like, are you sure you read this correctly? Because I got questions about how you read this. In the ancient world, it's not like the people defending Troy are monsters who are bad and have done something wrong, and the other side is pure good. That's not the story. There are heroes on both sides in that myth. That's weird. When you start to engage with Greek mythology, you'll realize that a lot of it is hero v hero, or hero v God, or hero v himself. Right. And that heroes are not normal people, and normal people do not normally become heroes. And they can't do that on their own. They only ever do that as a result of a divine intervention, either through birth, right, which is a divine intervention from the gods, and a god has sex with a human, all right? So I don't know where we get this reliance on heroes. I mean, this is just taking Jung and Joseph Campbell in the wrong direction. Joseph Campbell went in that direction, so maybe not wrong, but also completely incorrect way of thinking about the world. Like, no, it's protagonist and antagonist. The goodness and badness of both protagonist and antagonist are questionable. Agamemnon does not make exactly purely good decisions in his execution of the war. Part of the whole point of the Trojan horse is this the proper Greek thing to do? Like, is this honorable? Is this an honorable way to persecute the war? That's part of the point of the story, is to work out that question. It's not like win at any cost. And the argument, and many, many people have made this. You can look this up all over the place. Many people have made this. And I think that actually Adam mentioned it in one of our history talks. But Greeks are treacherous and Romans are virtuous. Like, this is a big debate in the history circles. Like, it certainly seems like something like that might be playing out. That's possible, man, because boy, the literature indicates it very strongly, is that the Romans really hold to virtue in a way the Greeks do not. And are they struggling with that? Absolutely. And like, you can object to that, but like Sparta, man, like they had slaves. They had the Helots. They were horrible, the Helots. They're Greeks. You know, I mean, Athens wasn't a wonderful place. It may have been the best place in the ancient world, but like Athens had issues. They had all kinds of leaders that led them into unnecessary wars for no reason that they couldn't win. These are not easy to work out issues here. And I think the mythos was the process of trying to work out those issues. And so when you're thinking and talking about the Greek mythos, that's what you're thinking and talking about. And so to reduce it down to a hero's journey, which never happened in any Greek myth that I'm aware of. So it's a little weird that they talk about that. I'm like, what are you talking about? The hero's journey. Jason and the Argonauts wasn't a single hero. I'm not saying there aren't stories with single heroes going on journeys, but they usually involve the gods. And leaving that out seems intellectually dishonest to me, fundamentally. And what you're going to notice is that's what they're doing. They're leaving out the driver of the story, which always seems to be religious in nature, or divine in nature, or spiritual in nature. However you want to say it. I don't care what word you use there. It doesn't actually matter. It's something outside of what you're talking about, though. In other words, the world is more enchanted than your language would lead us to believe. And that is the more important part. What are you leaving out? What is getting left out of these discussions? Why are these discussions all about things emerging? And every once in a while they say divine or emanation or whatever, but let me tell you about the emergence. Spend 20 minutes on one and they'll mention the other once. How interesting. And that's what I want you to notice about the conversation. Now, you may think they, quote, made progress, but actually all they did was find more justification for emergence. And yeah, the memes emerge into archetypes, and therefore the archetypes are just memes that lasted. And I'm like, this is just more evolutionary theory. Like, you didn't explain anything. You just applied evolutionary theory set to thoughts. But you haven't talked about the origin of thoughts, where they're born, how they develop, and how you're judging those thoughts, like, or what mechanisms are judging those thoughts even. We haven't even gotten there to make them refined thoughts that are memes, and then all of those same things again to archetypes. So you can see the self-reference. Like, there's a process that would have to exist that differentiates memes from any random thought you have or any string of thoughts you have. And then you would need a process to differentiate memes into archetypes. And all of that requires judgment. And where the hell is that coming from? Where are you standing and where are you starting? Those are the two questions we need to start asking these people. Because until we get to where the hell that's going on, they're going to sound logical, reasonable, and rational. Because logic, reason, and rationality works fine with a starting point and a telos. Now, if you're really, really good, and you're probably not, you can derive certain aspects of telos from the logic, reason, and rationality, because you can extend it to where it ends and go, aha. Right. You were going to murder millions of people all along. That was your intent. Right. And sometimes people see that, and usually we call them prophets or something, but I don't know if I go that far, but not wrong. But also, it's all right there. Like, using logic, reason, and rationality, if that's what person's stuck in, you know what they're going to do next before they do, probably. They don't know what's possessed them. And that's the problem. I mean, this is how ideologies are born. Ideologies are logical, reasonable, and rational. They just have bad final cause, bad telos. That's all. And usually they're missing a bunch of parts of the world to accomplish that. Right? Because if being is good and you start from there, it changes all of this stuff. It changes everything. It's a wonderful starting axiom to make the world a better place. And these guys don't have it. I don't know where they're starting from. It's crazy. I don't know what their point is. Like, who cares if memes are like broken archetypes trying to emerge, or whatever the thesis is here, through the Baldwin effect? Does that affect my dinner? Does that affect my friends? Does that affect all the wood I have in my yard that needs to get dealt with? No. Like, I don't understand why this is connected to reality. Does it explain anything in culture? Is the explanation of the thing in culture useful to do something with in culture at that layer even? No. No, it's not. It can't be, in fact, which is even funnier. I'm like, yeah, good description's fantastic. Now what? Well, but now you know. I'm like, well, maybe, but I can't act on the knowledge. I'm a pragmatist. So if I can't act on the knowledge, I'm like, who cares? It's not hard. Right? So what are you doing? What's your purpose? What's your telos? What's your final cause? Make final cause great again. When you start thinking about that, you can ascertain very, very quickly whether or not you should be listening to something. What is their goal? Are they merely trying to describe something? Are they trying to explain something? I have a video about this, by the way. Right? Description versus explanation versus prescription versus prediction. Right. You need to know what's going on there, because those are different things. And that'll help you with the inference. So look, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sorry that last 10 or so minutes was not as groundbreaking as other people thought it was. I don't think it's going to open Dawkins up to anything, because they're just going to apply the same tools they just did. I mean, they already did it, right? They started to apply the tools immediately. I'm like, well, that's great, but you're stuck in the same pattern again. And now you're just going to stay wandering in that desert for another 40 years before you come to the next plateau, because that's what you do. But I don't want to wander in the desert. That's a meaning crisis. So thanks for hanging in, guys. Comment, like, subscribe, tell your friends, whatever it takes. Trying to grow the channel here. Buy some merch. We get some cool merch. We got more cool merch coming up. Might be out by the time this is out. We'll see. See how things progress. And look, be better. Worry about final cause first. A lot of things resolve when you deal with final cause first. And thank you very much for your time and attention.